Welcome back to another episode of Who Cares Anyway? My name is Quentin Walker, and for those of you who don't know, who might be new around here or who may have forgotten, this is a sports podcast where I give you, usually, my sports opinions. And if you agree with me, cool. If you don't, cool. Either way, who cares anyway? Um, Notice I say usually in that intro. Today's episode is a little different. Today's episode is going to be a little more educational, so to speak, a little more PowerPointy than usual. Today, I want to talk about the name, image, and likeness saga of college sports, and how, excuse me, and how that's pertaining to current college athletes, future college athletes, and what they're doing for past college athletes that didn't have this opportunity to capitalize on. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the transfer portal and not necessarily how it works, but something new that the NCAA has instated in into transfers and how that works. Um, but I'm not gonna focus too much on that because while the two do go hand in hand, we're focusing on NIL stuff and how and the changes that are being made to NIL and how going forward compensation for college athletes is going to look and where it all started. So if you're a college sports fan, this episode is for you. If you're not, this episode is still for you because you're learning something. So let's start from where it all started. 2019, the state of California becomes the first state to pass name, image, and likeness legislation in the Fair Pay to Play Act. Now, this is an act that prohibits the NCAA and any of its member institutions, so any D1, 2, or 3 schools, from punishing student athletes who earn name, image, and likeness compensation. So, the layman's terms, NCAA board can't punish, NCAA officials can't punish student athletes, and any member schools can't punish student athletes for going and doing a commercial or using their name or their image to create revenue for themselves. This legislation was slated to uh, go into effect in 2023, so about a year ago. This was big at the time because this was around the time where I believe this actually happened shortly before COVID. Now that I'm thinking about it, and it kind of really does set up the domino effect. Um, but uh, it was big at the time because there were a lot of current players at the time and former players who felt that the long standing, I don't want to say ritual, but it kind of fits the bill. The long standing concept of these institutions using their student athletes as marketing tools and not giving the student athletes any of the revenue, any share of the revenue that came in off of them, off of the use of their name, image, and likeness. More often than not, their image and likeness, whether it be in pamphlets, whether it be or billboards, tickets, whatever you could think of that you can slap a college football player's media day picture on, or a college basketball play like Midnight Madness for a lot of college basketball, for the college basketball fans out there. A lot of schools have that Midnight Madness type of thing. Um, it, it it was getting to the point where these players who are overworked, not only because you're not only a student, which is a task in and of itself. Being a college student is already an ordeal, but you're also tacking on to that, playing in most cases high level collegiate athletics. And some would argue that Division I athletes are as close to pro level athletes as you can get. Now, there are some arguments out there that say that collegiate athletes have it easier because they have their schedules catered to them, and they get around the clock help and this, that, and the third. And while some of that may be true, think about the ones that don't pick easy majors. Think about the collegiate athletes that go to college and actually pursue their degree at a high level institution, and pursue a degree in something like engineering, or uh, business, or law, or biomechanical engineering, or something that's not just communications. No knock on getting a communications degree. I have a communications degree. Communications degrees are really, really, really useful. But it's not just, it doesn't have that connotation of, oh, this is a cakewalk degree. Um, so those student athletes are basically working double time, and a lot of them are fighting tooth and nail to have any semblance of a school life balance. And usually, what happens is school starts to fall by the wayside. Um, but they do their best to have some kind of a balance because you're a college student, and yeah, you signed up for it, but you still are also trying to live the life of a young adult. You still also want to live the life of a young adult, right? So, like I said, a lot of current players at the time and former felt that it was time for a change, time for a shift in the way that student athletes were treated and regarded at these institutions, and in the way that the NCAA handled compensating their student athletes. So fast forward to 2020, Colorado, Florida, Nebraska, New Jersey, and many other states all followed California's example and decided to pass laws permitting student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. Now, like I said earlier, these regulations didn't go into effect right away. With a few of these states, it was either 2022 or 2023. But you're starting to see the domino effect. You're starting to see these other states that are like, okay, this makes sense. Because if if these schools, especially state schools, are using these athletes to bring in millions in revenue every year, and they get none of it, why shouldn't they be able to go and use their name, image, and likeness in the way that these institutions do? Because up until 2019, well, really up until last year, because that's when everything kind of went into effect, but up until then, it was almost as if a student athlete had no ownership over themselves. Like they couldn't go out. Perfect example is the NCAA football games, and this is actually perfectly ties into what I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But the NCAA football games, you were not when you got the game on release. None of the players had their actual names. They were all listed as their position and their number. So if you were on a team and your quarterback was wearing 10, his name would be quarterback 10, quarterback number 10, right? And you had to go in and either download rosters with every player's name or manually do it. I was lucky enough that I could find roster people who already did the work for me and pull the rosters. Um, but that was a game that made EA Sports and the NCAA millions, but the players saw nothing from that. So you get to 2020 and these schools are like, and these states are like, okay, that's not cool. We gotta fix that. We gotta fix that. We gotta change that. These students are unhappy is the simplest way I can put it. These students are unhappy with the way that they're being treated and unhappy with the fact that they can't capitalize off of themselves the way that these institutions do. So something's got to give, right? Also in 2020, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, the NAIA, did the same and passed regulations allowing NIL compensation for their student athletes. Now, the NAIA regulates collegiate athletics at 252 member schools, and they field 77,000 student athletes in 27 different sports. So let's just picture for a second, if that's one association, right? That I'm pretty sure the NAIA only has one division. I'll have to double check that. But that's 77,000 angry late teen, early 20 student athletes, right? Flip on the flip side, you get to the NCAA. The NCAA has three different divisions, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's got to be upwards of a million students, of a million student athletes. It's got to be because if the NAIA has 77,000, I'm sure Division 1 football on its own has about that much. So just imagine the whole student body of the NCAA student athletes being in an uproar because they feel they're being improperly used and treated. Fast forward another year, NCAA versus Austin. Austin. This was a uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Court case. I don't know why I just blanked on that. This was a court case in which former and current players came to district courts first and questioned whether or not the NCAA rules that limited education-related benefits for student athletes violated antitrust laws. Now, when it was brought to district court, the district court ruled in favor of the current and former collegiate athletes, right? They found that the NCAA's restrictions on these benefits like scholarships, specifically for graduate school, also tutoring, uh, institution issued computers, so on and so forth. The district court ruled that these restrictions violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. I'm not going to explain what that is. If you really want to know, go look it up. Basically, all I'm saying is that the NCAA was found in violation of antitrust laws. Um, the district court allowed the NCAA to maintain rules that kept student athletes from making money based off of their athletic play, and uh, uh, I guess that's really the best way to put it. Yeah, but they require the NCAA to allow schools to provide other benefits related to education, like I said earlier, such as scholarships for graduate school, uh, institution issued computers for classes, tutoring, other things you could think of that a school would be able to give to their students in order to aid their education, right? Then the case was brought to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because the NCAA tried to appeal uh, the fact that they were in fact in violation of antitrust laws. The Ninth Circuit Court agreed with the district court in saying that the NCAA was indeed in violation of antitrust laws, and that restricting benefits related to education was unlawful. And then in 2021, June 21st, 2021 to be specific, the case got brought to the Supreme Court because the NCAA just couldn't fathom the fact that they were unlawfully restricting their students. It's crazy to me. Um, in that, when it got to the Supreme Court once again affirmed the lower court's decisions in saying that the NCAA and the NCAA's actions to restrict education related benefits was in violation of antitrust laws. And in that ruling, I have two quotes from two Supreme Court justices. I'll throw them up on the screen. Um, Justice Neil Gorsuch stated that the NCAA's restrictions were unlawful restraints of trade. I feel like the NCAA just got like I don't know the exact jargon, but I feel like that's got to be a slap in the face to the NCAA for them to sit here and they've elevated this three different times through appeals, and They get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's like, nah, dog, this ain't it. This ain't it. Also, Justice Brett Kavanaugh said that the NCAA's broader compensation rules might be subject to future antitrust challenges. So it wasn't just the NCAA and their restriction of education related benefits that was a problem. But when you look deeper, it became it became clear that the decision not to pay students a share of the revenue that the students were bringing in could also be a problem in the future, right? So we're seeing the dominoes start to fall, and because of this ruling, the NCAA was forced. I'm going to say they were forced because it's not like they just willingly did this. They were forced to adopt an interim NIL policy that allowed student athletes to benefit financially from their name, image, and likeness without any fear of penalty. So now with this in place, you have the beginnings of what is being called in today's landscape of college athletics the wild wild west. And you're this is where the beginnings of players signing these massive deals that are still ballooning to this day with these big companies to basically just be a part of advertisements. So with this in place, you fast forward to 2022, and the NCAA Board of Directors issued NIL guidance to their member schools, which reinforced the fact that basically saying schools could not offer student athletes any recruiting incentives that were linked to potential NIL arrangements. Basically, you couldn't, as a coach, go to a player and say, if you come to this school, you're going to make $1 million as long as you do this commercial with this car company. Or more often than not, what really happens is, hey, we'll get you a car, but you just got to do this commercial for this company over here, for this dealership over here. Or we'll get you a house, but you gotta go to this store or this real estate agency and put your face on a sign and say that you use this realtor to get this house. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and I'm gonna get into really where we're at because things are still changing. This is, and like I said, it's the Wild West. This is an ever changing beast right now. And it's very nuanced, and the institutions are still trying to figure it out themselves. And I think players are really still trying to figure it out and navigate it best as they can. Granted, you have some players that are blinded by the dollar sign and they're chasing the money wherever it is. And some players are uh, getting spurned by it. Uh, and they're agreeing to NIL deals, and then they get to a school and it falls through. And now they're in a school, now they're at an institution that they don't want to be in because of the fact that they felt that they were going to have this sum of money waiting for them once they got there, and then they get there and now that sum of money is out the window and now they're stuck. Which brings me to the transfer portal. Now I said I'm not gonna get in depth with it because that could be a video, an episode in and of itself. The transfer portal has been, I don't even have the words to describe what the transfer portal has been for the last 3, 4 years, but it's been a mess, and it's only continuing to get messier. But this year, the beginning of this year, a couple months ago now, in April, the NCAA implemented a rule that is allowing all student athletes at the Division I level. Very important caveat to this. At the Division I level. So to me, that's a trial run. We're seeing how it goes because we're seeing more and more player movement at the Division I level, especially in Division I football. And they're trying to see how it kind of plays out. But they're allowing all student athletes at the Division I level to transfer and play immediately. The old rule used to be you could transfer, but you had to sit out a year before being eligible to compete. Now they do away with that, and they're saying that student athletes are able to transfer and compete immediately as long as they're leaving the previous school in good academic standing, and they meet the progress towards degree requirements for their new school. Basically, as long as they're on their degree track and they're uh, where they should be for their uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Where they should be for their class, essentially. So if you're a sophomore, when you transfer, as long as you are on the degree track that a sophomore should be on at your new institution, you're fine. You can play as soon as you get there. You're eligible to play as soon as you get there. Now, this change doesn't really do anything outside of allowing student athletes to play immediately. So with this in place, transfer windows are still in place. I think for college football, there are 2 transfer windows. I don't know about the transfer windows for the other sports. Like I said, transfer portal is very nuanced and it's on a season by season basis. Um, but the transfer windows are still in effect. No changes to those, and student athletes still have to uh, declare that they are transferring and enter themselves into the transfer portal in these windows, with the exception of uh, an unforeseen circumstance like a head coach being fired or a head coach leaving. That is that is an example of one of the only times that student athletes can transfer outside of the transfer windows or enter the transfer portal outside of the transfer windows. And I realize I'm talking about the transfer portal, and some people listening and watching might not know what the transfer portal is. The transfer portal is essentially free agency for college athletics. That's the best way to put it. Think Lil Jimmy from the Ohio State University, decides that he wants to transfer, and he puts his name into into this database, and other schools can see this database, and they can say, and let's say Texas, Georgia, USC, and North Carolina can all look at it and say, we want Lil Jimmy on our team. We're gonna go try and recruit him. That is exactly what the transfer portal is in the most simplest way possible. Um, Back to what I was saying. The new transfer rule doesn't change anything other than the fact that, like I said, other than the fact that student athletes can play immediately once they transfer. So, but there's also, I don't know if this is a part of this rule. I believe this was put in before this rule was put into place, but there's no limit on the number of times a student athlete can transfer now. Um, so student athletes can transfer mid-year, right after the end of a season, if they're not feeling that school, or if they feel that they've accomplished what they wanted to accomplish at that school, they can transfer right then and there. They don't have to wait until the end of the year to transfer, and they don't have to. There is no, oh, you can only transfer twice in your collegiate career. They can transfer as many times as there are windows. Um, the only caveat to that is student athletes are not allowed to transfer mid-year and play in the same season. So, say a football player transfers in the transfer window before the season starts, he can't play that season, is what I'm understanding of it. So if he played last season and transferred, I think it's a little different for football. I think it's the way that the calendar works out in football is a little different. Um, but basically, if I, this is a better example, because I was definitely wrong in the way I was trying to give that. A better example is if a player ends a season and he decides to go and enter he or she decides to go and enter the transfer portal. When they get to the new school, if the new school that they're at, that they get to, is still in season for that sport, so say if for basketball, if the school that he or she transferred from didn't make the tournament, and the school that they transferred to made the tournament, they're not allowed to play in that tournament. That is, as far as I can tell, really the only caveat to this rule, and uh, and how the transfer portal works now. And I bring this up because, like I said earlier, the transfer portal and NIL are linked. It's become this inevitability that players are leaving schools multiple times over in in the pursuit of money. And I found, and while I was doing research for this, I found an article from Bleacher Report from April this year that is talking about an unnamed men's college basketball player, who requested $1.5 million in NIL money to transfer. Hasn't entered the portal yet. I don't know if he entered the portal as of recording this because it's an unnamed player. But the fact that student athletes have this agency to go out and request this amount of money from school, technically not from schools, but yes, from a school, in order to transfer to a school, is just mind blowing to me. It's crazy. This is like this is almost close enough to like a vet minimum contract in the NBA. Like you're asking for a small contract just to go switch schools and play basketball for somebody else. And the reason why the transfer portal and the NIL and the current landscape of college athletics has been called the Wild West is because you start to there becomes this question of, does the degree matter anymore? And you have, with all this player movement going on and all these and players just like the one I just talked about who are requesting money to transfer and not transferring and then trying to get into NIL stuff. You have this whirlwind that's happening, and it's leaving coaches flustered, and they're routinely losing guys that are key to their programs for a sum of cash. Like I said earlier, it's essentially free agency for college athletics. Um, and the NCAA really has to find a way to combat that. And I'm gonna talk about. I think they figured it out, but we're gonna get into that in a little bit because I want to talk about something that is very near to me and dear to me. I talked about earlier the NCAA football games and how when you get the copy of the game on release, none of the players had their actual names in there. So you either have to manually enter the players' names or you download a roster or a little bit of both, right? This year, college EA Sports gave us an early Christmas gift and said we're bringing back college football. We're bringing back NCAA football. They've rebranded it and called it college football. It's called College Football 25. I, myself, and many other college football fans and fans of the NCAA football games jumped for joy because it's been 10 years since the last one, and we're finally getting a game where every single player is going to be named on release. And now that's not like the big thing here, but these players are getting revenue shares off of it. That's that's the key point. These players are getting revenue shares off their name being in these games, in this game now, off their image being in these games now, off their likeness being in these games now. So, that being said, I want to talk a little bit about how EA Sports and the NCAA are going about paying. They're paying it to the schools, but the schools are going to pay, it's going to be a trickle down effect. The schools are going to pay it down to the student athletes, um, I believe. If not, EA Sports might be just, but I don't think I don't think it's able to work like that. I'm pretty sure it's EA Sports paying it out to the schools, and then the schools are going to pay it out to the student athletes. Um, so they did kind of like a tier list of each school in the game, and the way they separated it was the tiers are based on every team's like every team's finish. And when I say finish, I don't mean what rank they were, but if a team finished in the AP top 25 poll, then they got a point. Uh, so every time a team finished in the final AP top 25 poll was a point for each team. And they pulled from 2013 to the most recent 2014 to the most recent year in 2023. So for each tier, there's a range of points. Well, for the first two tiers, there's a range of points, and then for tiers 3 and 4, I'm gonna get into that. So tier one, it was 6 to 10 points. So if you notice, tier one is going to be the smallest and most exclusive tier, with I believe only 8 teams, 9 teams. Uh, More than that, I lied. It is 13 teams. So tier one has 13 teams in it. These are teams that are you're more often than not going to see at the top of, or these are staples in the top 25. Schools like Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia, so on and so forth. I'll have the graphic on screen. Um, so tier one is each one of these schools had 6 to 10 finishes in the final top 25 poll. Tier two is 2 to 5 points. So same concept. You have you have anywhere between 2 finishes and 5 finishes in the final AP Top 25 poll from 2014 to 2023. These schools are kind of the smaller, not I don't want to say smaller, but they're the schools that make a run every so often. The schools that kind of come out of nowhere and surprise people. Um, Schools like Cincinnati when they had their big run a couple years ago. Uh, TCU, uh, Louisville, Texas A&M. Uh, you know, you pick I don't want to say mid-major, but you pick a school from a bigger conference that is usually kind of in the middle of that conference, they'll probably be here. Um, Tier three is all schools that had only one finish in the final AP Top 25 poll from 2014 to 2023. And the tier four are schools that had no finishes. So they did not finish a season in the AP Top 25. Now, on screen, I'll have uh, each team with the number of finishes in the top 25 for visual reference, because I'm not going to read through how many. That's a lot of schools. I'm not going to read through how many each school had, but at least 3 and 4 you had 1 and 0, right? And there are a couple teams that are surprising. And when I was looking at this, I didn't even think that they would be in the tiers they're in. But when I went and tried to figure out how many finishes they had, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Um, Example being Iowa. Iowa is a tier one school. They're just barely a tier one school, but they're a tier one school. With 6 finishes, I've seen people talking about the tiers on social media, and I've seen the comments, and I've seen I've seen a few people say, how is Iowa in a tier above a school like Texas or USC? Simple. Iowa finished in the top 25 more times than USC and Texas did. Don't you can't really I don't want to say get mad, but you can't really question it when it's laid out clearly in front of you. Um, but like I said, a school like Texas, USC, Florida State, Florida, Washington is a little understandable. They were just kind of catching their stride as of the last few years. But schools like that, schools that I feel are bigger brands in the world of college football, but that brand doesn't always necessarily contribute to success on the field and lead to a top 25 finish at the end of the year. Now, granted, that's a that's a conversation that could be had at a different time because the AP top 25 poll is a little iffy, which is why the college football playoff rankings were introduced in 2014. But and even then, you could argue those college football is wild. It's a wild landscape. There's a lot of arguments happening. Um, but these it seems like they went about this intentionally and objectively and found a good way to kind of figure out how to separate each of these schools and determine what each school's payout would be for being involved in the game. That being said, we get to the payouts for each tier. So, tier one will get a minimum payout, and these are minimum numbers because I think they're probably gonna add more based off of sales and ad revenue and so on and so forth. But just for being involved in the game, the tier one schools get a minimum of $99,875.16. I don't know how they figured out how to divvy this up, but that's how they did it. Uh, and this should be on the screen. I made the graphic, so it should be on the screen. Tier two gets $59,000 and 900 yeah $59,000 $59,925. Brain, work with me here. And 9 cents. Tier three gets $39,950.06, and then tier four gets $9,987.52. Now, like I said earlier, I don't know how the schools are going to go about divvying up this money because I feel like these payouts are more for the student athletes than they are for the schools because realistically all the schools are the only thing the schools are adding are the uniforms, the stadiums, and the logos. Whereas it's the student athletes that I feel are adding the most to it because the game isn't going to be the game. The game, how do I put this? It's still going to be there whether the student athletes are in it or not, right? So the schools would still get paid whatever they were going to get paid. But now with the addition of the student athletes being in the game and being able to profit off of this, I feel like these payouts, some of this money, maybe not all of it, but some of this is going to have to be dispersed across every player on these teams that's in the game and that has opted into the game. Um, And like I said, this is huge because this is something that we didn't have 10 years ago, both from a student athlete perspective of getting compensation for your likeness being in the game, but from a fan perspective of being able to see these players that you watch every Saturday on your television, being able to see them in a game that you play now, like you would with Madden, and the NFL players that you see Sunday in and Sunday out. And this isn't, I feel, this is only the beginning of uh, student athletes being paid like this and for something like this. Um, I think that the schools and the conferences will kind of start to figure out how to do revenue sharing of the television deals that are done and stuff like that. But like I said earlier, I think the NCAA is starting to figure out how to go about doing this. Um, and the future kind of looks like this. So the NCAA and the board of governor and their board of governors decided that they're going to pay a little. I don't know the exact number, but it's more than 2.7 billion. That's billion with a B, not million, not trillion, billion. $2.7 billion in damages to pre-NIL student athletes dating back to 2016. So if you were a student athlete in 2016 for I don't know if it's just Division One. I don't know about that. But if you were a student athlete at an NCAA member school from 2016 to probably I'd say 2020, maybe 2021, then you are getting a share, whatever the share is, however they're deciding to split this, you are getting a share of $2.7 billion. Um, and now I'm sitting here wishing that my college athletics career actually worked out because I would be a part of that. Anyway, um, and that's huge because this is the NCAA showing, I don't want to say remorse, but showing that they're understanding that their ways of the past were not the way to go about things, and that they something needed to change, and they're trying to retroactively implement that change for former student athletes. Now, for the current and future student athletes, the NCAA and their Power Five conferences, so the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, and the no longer with us Pac-12, have decided on a revenue sharing plan that is allowing each school in those conferences to share more than $20 million a year. Now that time it was a million. $20 million a year with their student athletes across. I'm assuming across all sports. So, and this is, I'm sure this is going to be across all Division One sports because it is just Power Five. So, uh, and those are Division One conferences. Um, this is huge because this is what these players have been trying to get to. This is what uh, this is this is the point that guys like Trevor Lawrence and uh, I don't want to put Johnny Manziel in here because he wasn't involved in the lead up to what NIL became, to the lead up into the instating of NIL regulations. But I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm sure Johnny Manziel had a hand in it from the outside. But Trevor Lawrence really was the the front man for it. Um, but this is what the current and former student athletes who were involved in the NCAA versus Alston case wanted. This is the point they wanted to get to. It wasn't about just NIL. It wasn't about doing little commercials here and there and TV spots and appearances and stuff like that. It wasn't just about that. It was about getting these institutions to pay their players like employees since they continually treat them like employees. Um, Now, this revenue sharing plan doesn't go into effect immediately. Pending it will take time to be approved, but pending approval, the plan could start as early as fall of 2025. So just a year, about a year and a half from now. And I couldn't really find anything on the structure of the payouts, and both for, like I said earlier, for college football 25, but also for this revenue sharing plan. I couldn't really find the structure, anything on the structure of it. But I'm in my mind, I'm thinking that it's going to be at each school's discretion on and uh yeah, it's going to be based off each school's discretion on how they decide to divvy up the payout and the sharing. Um, I the simplest way I can think of right now, and the thing that comes to mind immediately is that each school is going to uh kind of like how each school was tiered. Each school is going to look into their sports and see which schools are making which sports are making them the most revenue. So for a school like UNC, right, their men's basketball would probably gain the most. It probably makes them the most money, and they would get the biggest share of that revenue. And then it would be they would tier based off of what share of the revenue brought in each sport has, if that makes any sense. Um, so like I said, if the men's basketball team is the biggest share of the revenue brought in, they're gonna get the biggest share of the revenue being paid out. And then so on and so forth. So like the football team, whatever, however it shakes out. That's the quickest way I can think to do it, and that feels like the NCAA way to do it, but details are yet to be released. I will monitor it as time goes on and see how they kind of figure that stuff out. So if if you're curious and you're interested in this and you want to know more, follow me on Instagram because it'll probably be there. Who Cares Anyway podcast. I'm also on Facebook, so go like and follow the page there. Again, Who Cares Anyway podcast. Gotta plug these things because if I don't plug these things, people don't know. But uh, definitely something to watch for the future. Definitely a step in the right direction for student athletes and the NCAA. This is going to kind of break up the trend of student athletes transferring for NIL money a little bit. Granted, it's only across Power Five schools, so you the effects seen might be small for the moment, for the beginning of it. But once they see how this works out and they see if it works out well and it becomes implemented in other conferences and across other divisions, we might get to a point of stasis again in the world of college football where everybody's happy and we can get back to the integrity and the I keep thinking pageantry, but also that of what college football, not even just college football, what college athletics really is, because I think that's what's been lost over the last 5 or so years is the competitive integrity of college athletics, especially with the bigger sports like college football or college basketball. You've got players that are leaving and they're leaving for all the wrong reasons and then not only putting their previous institutions at a disadvantage, but also putting their educations at a disadvantage. Um, but like I said, I think the NCAA took a step in the right direction. I think that this is going to be beneficial for both sides, and that we'll see this be I will definitely see this be implemented in other conferences and in other divisions as just as the domino effect for NIL when it started. This will be the domino effect for paying players the way they should be paid. Um, that being said, I'm done. I'm out of here. Remember to do all the usual YouTube things like comment, subscribe, click the notification bell, share the video. Like I said earlier, follow me on Instagram, follow the podcast on Instagram, on Facebook, other, yeah, whatever. At the end of the day, who cares anyway?